All
We are
right,
recording.
I believe so. Yeah. So this is Job, who needs no introduction
Uh,
to Paul people, and and I'm Luke. And so on the Rando, I feel like I'm colonizing the Rando channel because I've been on all of them so far. But I'd like to have a lot. I would like to. I know there's a lot more conversations going on, and I'd like. I don't know. It'd be fun if everyone would just put theirs up there, and then it could just self-filter, and the ones that people are interested in, they can watch.
yeah, we're kind of working on that regarding just recording stuff and putting it out there, and then people can make the decision whether they want to watch it or not.
Yeah.
So, for some context, for those of you who've seen the recent conversation between Luke and Julian regarding rationalist ideologues, Dostoevsky, um, I have trouble following it because I think I'm stuck in my own rationalist frame.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that is whether or not you are. I think if one is, this is my problem with intellectual. This is what I would say is the practical problem of intellectual rationalist frames is they're totalizing, and you can't see outside of them, and so it's kind of like I've illustrated it this way before, and I think I heard this. I won't remember the guy's name. He's an author, a short story author who passed away a few years ago. David Foster Wallace,
Uh-huh.
and he wrote once, or he illustrated. Maybe this was in an article that he wrote that there were two young fish swimming, and an old fish swam by, and he said, "How's the water, boys?" And they looked at each other and said, "What's water?"
Mm-hmm.
It's it's kind of that thing, is you can't see the thing you don't know you're not seeing. Um, and and I think the problem with rationalistic frames, no matter what you put at the top of the hierarchy of your rationalist frame, I think I think foundationalist biblicists do this all the time too. It's not just, you know, and I don't know what's at the top of your frame, whether it's coming out of like a scientific empiricist kind of rationalism, like a Sam Harris type reason rationalism, Steven Pinker type reason rationalism. Biblicists, Christian biblicists, will do the same thing. They just, in my mind, it's rationalism. Their intellectual framework is at the top. They just put different lenses at the top. A Christian foundationalist would say, well, the Bible, like, but what they don't, but what postmodernism showed us is, there's no clear, obvious, non-perspectival interpretation of the Bible, non historically embedded and culturally perceived interpretation of the Bible, right? Um, you can't. There is no view from nowhere, essentially, right? When it comes to reading the Bible, for instance, but what I'm trying to get at when I talk about rationalism, or with Julian, is that I'm not so interested what you're putting at the top of your rationalistic frame, whether it's the Bible or whether it's empiricism. I would say that whole game is wrong. Does that make sense at all?
No, because I'm trying to. I'm honest, man.
No,
Uh,
I love it. I love it. And
I'm
maybe it's
trying
not,
to.
maybe it's not you, maybe it's me. I mean,
I
maybe.
don't know. I think. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how you will end up at a effective system for obtaining knowledge.
Mm,
So, if you ask me where my frame is that the scientific method is a reliable way for obtaining certain types of knowledge
I would agree.
under a certain amount of probability. In that sense, I'm not a Harisian. I'm sort of a half Harisian. in the sense that I regard the scientific method as very effective, but I also know it's intrinsically limited.
Yeah.
I had a discussion with some fine folks on the Discord channel about that recently. What confuses me about your discussion with Julian is that I understand that outside the necessarily limited frame of the scientific method is a world that we might not know about and we might never know about. Then I end up at the, well then, but how could we obtain information about it if we can't empirically research it? And then you say, well, it becomes experience, like love. Let's say we wouldn't be able to scientifically determine what love is, as far as science can.
Yeah.
Then you're stuck with the pure experience. And maybe you can have a discussion on, well, we have certain feelings that we agree on are similar. But I don't see how that can take you, how can you go any further than that? I'm not saying it's a problem either. I'm trying to understand what you are concerned about, because I got the impression you are concerned about something.
Yeah. I guess so. So I put in the comments, so that two things is in regard to my concern. I tend to be, I don't know, I can tend to overstate things, and I also, because there were a few people who I after the conversation I realized that it could have come across like, I mean, not like I'm gaslighting or something, but I could have come across like this is a bigger concern for me than it is. I don't, it's a potential that I see out there, and it is something that I wouldn't want to have happen. I don't feel like that is necessarily even the trajectory. I just feel like the kinds of conversations that I wouldn't like have been popping up more than would be my preference.
On
But
the
I don't think
Discord.
on the Discord or in the comments of a video of Paul Vanderklay, and it's more of like the kind of I don't know, and they're not necessarily bad, but it's the very intellectual, apologetic style, back and forth debate types of conversations. I don't know, they just have a different feel to me, which I think, because ultimately at the end of the day, it all comes down to embodiment and practice, and putting these, not keeping these things merely in our head, but living them out, right? It doesn't matter necessarily what you profess or confess apart from living that. That's the whole, seemingly contrary thing in the New Testament between what people would pit Paul versus James. James would say, you say you have faith, great, I'll show you my faith by what I do, that sort of thing. It's not about mere profession, it's about living it out. And so I don't think Paul's channel is necessarily going that direction, although I in what I call my shaman intuition, I feel like I see that spirit popping up occasionally, and that's just something I don't like. I don't think that's going to be. So what I was going to say, Michael, I don't know if you've interacted with Michael at all from Paul's channel, but
I have not, no.
He sent me an email, which I posted in the comments of that video, because it was kind of a response to Julian and I's talk, and I thought it was really good. So I just wanted to put it in the comments so that anyone could see it. And so, I mean, you can go read that if you want, but it's a bunch of side tangents. What I was going to say is, I think in regard to your empiricism and love, and that empiricism gives us certain types of knowledge, and even though it's limited, I think this is kind of what I think the Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson conversations were trying to delve into this arena a little bit. Like, what was because I have some thoughts on what I think Jordan Peterson was trying to say about Sam's perspective, and Paul has made he's made videos about these sorts of things. So I mean, what do you think about what Paul has said, if anything comes to mind about like the Jordan Peterson Sam Harris talks?
Well,
Because to
what
me
Paul has,
to me it's the same. I think what Jordan Peterson is trying to get at is kind of because in a short version, this is what I would say, is he's trying to say that empiricism works in a certain regard, but even like when I would say works is a word that fudges. Works toward what? Like, what is the telos? What is the end? What are you trying to accomplish? And that smuggles in things like goals and desires and hierarchies and values, because working to what end is something that's smuggled in, and that's something that science can never get you. And so science, this is like what Peugeot says, science is necessarily embedded within a religious hierarchy because it can't ever get you goals. Science is always focused towards something, but science can tell you nothing about focus in and of itself, because focus is a bigger thing.
Descriptive.
Right.
Yes.
But it depends on what you want. It's embedded within a consciousness. You know what I mean? It's subservient to consciousness. And I think this was Peterson's primary point in those talks. Of course it works. Like, this is what Barfield says. Science works because it's necessarily rooted in the material world. And so ultimately, like, if you're making a simple gear or a combustion engine, it either works or it doesn't. But
Right.
that but that tells you nothing about the goal of wanting to make a combustion engine and the imagination and the purpose that's higher than that whole process.
Right. And my motivation is not to discuss the limitations of the scientific method. I mean, I'm well aware of them. I'm trying to understand how there can be a hierarchy. At least how one can have a hierarchy regarding the things they'd like to see discussed and the things they would not like to see discussed in a group. How do you grade those? Because I get the feeling that you are concerned that we limit ourselves by trying to frame everything in some sort of rationalist Occam's razor box.
No, it's more, maybe I can illustrate it this way. It's more about like the spirit of a conversation. So if you're having a conversation with a friend or your wife or us or something, I feel like everyone has had the experience where you've had the experience of both talking with someone in a way where you're trying to understand and going back and forth, or the spirit of talking past someone. So like if I'm in a fight with my wife or something, there's definitely times when we're not trying to understand each other. We're trying to fight for our own rightness.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And so we're not in those moments. I would say we're not. There's a very different spirit than when we're trying to communicate and understand and work together in somewhat of a, where we're both, I mean, the way that I always say it, where we're submitted to the truth outside the truth that we understand, or like Jordan Peterson would say, the thing that's going to correct you and push you on to grow and evolve and advance is only ever going to manifest in error, because that's what's going to correct your current understanding. Your current model is going to go and work until it doesn't, and then that error is the thing that's going to correct you. But the problem is if you're not open to that air, if you just keep saying like, if the air, like Julian said that in our conversation, if the air is always outside of your box of acceptable response, then you'll never see it, or you'll never accept it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's those two kinds of conversations can happen. I do that sometimes, you know, like I'll get really fired. And that to me is the difference between tribalism and open dialogue. And I think when you get really bound up in just talking about ideas apart from personal story, maybe it's a lot easier to fall into tribalism. So I'm not so concerned about excluding certain ideas or others, or setting up some kind of like gatekeepery thing. That would be like I said in the comments of the video, that would be like a new kind of weird Orwellian tribalism.
Isn't this more towards the fighting rats?
What do you mean, the fighting rats?
The bigger rat will pin the smaller rat, but the smaller rat will refuse to play if the bigger rat never lets him win. You have to.
Yeah.
I mean, if there are people who aren't willing to have a conversation that starts with the rule that I am willing to change my opinion, given solid arguments, well, then people won't want to talk to these people.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I'm kind of hoping this will be self-healing sort of in that regard.
Yeah. And I think the thing that we have to realize too is there's a lot of different temperaments happening within all this too, you know, like it's a long changing your mind, or changing, I would even say beyond changing your mind, like in Barfield terms, almost changing the way you see takes a long time. I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, or, you know, and it happens to different degrees and different people in different ways. Part of it's maybe openness, like even big five stuff. Not all people are as open as others. And some people are more agreeable, some people are more combative. And so it just looks, I mean, maybe I'm arguing against somewhat, you know, phantoms of my own imagination, you know, that aren't really even legitimate or something.
Well, but that might simply be because of your frame. I was going to ask you a question. This isn't going to be an easy question to answer, or maybe it is. I'm curious in any case, but I'm curious to what your view is of existence itself, because I think it's fundamentally different from my own.
Existence itself.
What are you doing here?
Yeah, no, that's that's a really great question. I'm trying to think. The reason I hesitate is, I mean, I just didn't instantly know, and I'm trying to think. I'm always cautious of giving a preformed kind of answer, which I think is really easy to do, you know.
I'm thinking I don't know right now is also a fine answer.
Right. So, I mean, that is part of it for sure. I don't know fully. Probably the easiest way for me to answer that would be to say, I think the thing that most guides my existence, or that I want to most guide my existence, obviously we're not always completely consistent. is honesty. And that's something we've talked a lot about. I mean, that's what, like even in our first conversation, that's something that we really related with, the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon. That's something that came up in our first group talk with Paul. It's what, in terms of like what Eric has talked about, and admiration and respect. It's what draws me to people. What drives my existence, I think, is trying to be as honest as I can with myself and with others, because truly at the end of the day, I think in my deepest sense of honest self, I don't think I know what's going on. Like, I mean, obviously I do to somewhat, because I'm acting. I'm acting in the world in certain ways, and so there has to be some framework. You know, it's not like I don't have senses of meaning and truth and things, but like ultimately, big picture, I don't feel like I understand the world or God or other people in a way that I can I don't know, this maybe seems weird, but in this sense of like what Vanderklay and Vervaeke have talked about recently, in a way, in the mechanistic mind that I can manipulate, then that I can control, you know. And so I'm just really trying to be honest, kind of in the Jordan Peterson thing, and not do things that make me feel weak. You know, I'm trying to stop lying to myself. I'm trying to, more so all the time, like even in our Grief Observed talk, in realizing somewhat that I'm an addict. Like like I've just slowly come to the realization over a few years that I've been in weird, excuse me, in really weird minor degrees, lying to myself about my relationship with alcohol, for instance, you know. And I think I'm just in all those things all the time. I realize my own deceptions with other people, with myself, and ultimately at the end of the day, I feel like that's my most true compass in regard to existence, is trying to be honest. I don't know if that answers your question. As far as what is existence.
Well, that presupposes I had an expectation for what your answer would be. I had more of a curiosity to what your answer would be. I project on you very easily. You know how life can be, where you wake up and everything is sort of grayscale. Any description I give is going to be limited, but let's say everything around you is grayscale. Even though I wake up and my cat's there, my wife's there. And sometimes I get to realize that is really, really amazing when I think about it. God, this conversation is getting all weird and existential. You always strike me as somebody who, even when I can sometimes see color where my wife is or my cat is, or where other things are that jump out to me as meaningful in that grayscale, I always get the feeling that to you there are more colors than I can see. That you have a wider spectrum of appreciating existence. Now, you can't say whether that's true or not because you are not my mind. But I always get that, and that's why I wanted to talk to you when you talked about the rational mind closing over on itself. And that made me wonder what it's like if it doesn't, because I suspect mine does. It's been getting a bit more open since about 2 years, but
yeah.
I find it so difficult because as soon as you open that rational mind and you open your let's say your the negative the photo negative, you open it up to a wider spectrum. How do you know what's still really? How do you know you're not making it up? How do you know you're not? That is the difficult part. How do you know you're not completely going from order into full blown chaos? And because yes, that's where God lurks, but how do you even know that?
Yeah. I I don't know. So in response to what you're saying, I mean, I think we all see things differently to some regard. um and that, and those have strengths, those have pros, and those have cons. In you describing the world in grayscale, it's kind of interesting. I have a frog in my throat, sorry. um what's funny is I've always felt that way. I mean, I just tend to be a pretty passionate, um romantic type person, and I mean that in like the classic sense of a romantic. I uh I have kind of always felt that way. I feel like I see, at least emotionally, it's always felt to me that, and in regard to passion, that I feel like I see the world with more vibrancy than most people, and so it's hard for me to relate to people. And really, and probably the best way to describe it is, it's like, that's why I really like George MacDonald's book Lilith, or even it's why I tell people that I'm drawn to fiction versus nonfiction somewhat, is because the world to me really is um, magical and full of wonder. Like, I think I see the world a lot more, um, probably with somewhat childlike eyes than most adult people do. And I've met people that are like that too. Sarah, like our friend Sarah, is a lot that way to me. Um, and I think there are people that see that way even more so. To me, it's almost, I don't, in the way that I would say it, I don't know, this sounds like I'm, like it's self-congratulatory or something, but it's almost, I think in the New Testament, of Jesus saying, like, unless you become like children, you won't ever see the kingdom of God. Or even like, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you could move mountains. Or Peter walking on water, and when he's looking at Christ, he walks on water and he starts looking at the waves and he sinks. To me, that is almost like, when he's looking at Christ, the way that I see that or understand that is, he's looking at the icon of the unity of all things, God incarnate, and he's seeing, and in doing that, he's seeing the magic and the wonder of all things. He's looking at the person who's breathing the waves into existence. And so in that faith, walking on the water makes as much sense as walking on the land, because the God who makes us walk on land and not walk on water it's who he's looking in the face. And so of course you could walk on water. Why couldn't you? But then it's almost like when he reverts to the faithless way of seeing, and he looks at the waves and he thinks about them divorced from um, eyes on Christ, life in Christ. That's when he starts to sink. It's almost like in the Vervaeke. No, it's not. Who was that in Paul's thing when he talks about the mechanistic versus the intuitive mind? Or I think of, so this, to illustrate it back to me, it's almost like, you're familiar with Ian McGilchrist. but
I've heard of the book.
he's the master and the emissary, the divided brain. So the basic premise, as I understand of the book, I haven't read it either. I've listened to him speak some, but he says the right brain. One of the easiest ways to say it, although this is simplistic, right? It's an explanation. Sorry, my wife's going for a jog. He says the right brain is almost like the territory, and the left brain is the map. So your right brain is kind of like, it's the side of your brain which interacts with everything almost in a transrational way, because it's like it's the part of your brain that interacts with the whole world in a way that is, the left brain is also the language side, and so it's the side that's beyond explanation. In Paul's terms, like when you explain something, you plane it down and you simplify it. Like when you talk about a mountain, if I describe a mountain to you, that is not encompassing all of mountain. It's a simplified version. That's a left brain thing. The mountain is the right brain thing. It's the whole thing. I've always felt like where I live most of my life, especially inside my own head, is very right brained, which is almost why I feel like I can't communicate to people. Like I feel like I'm a terrible communicator because I almost don't know how to put what I'm thinking into words. It's like I can't even, it's hard for me to operate in the left brain almost, because I'm out here in this weird imaginative kind of beyond language land to speak to what you're saying.
But
And
I
I don't
think
know that it's not necessarily better. It's just different.
that yeah. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me that I then again have trouble following you if I am just abstracting things all day long into very limited representations, while trying to make sure those representations hold under all sorts of contexts. But
Yeah.
I probably do that to the world, and we can't help it, because if we had to reconsider each frame of interpretation in its entirety, we would never get anything done.
Right. No, for sure. That's like the illustration of someone saying, this is another way I've seen it with psychedelics. Like when somebody's tripping out on psychedelics, I've heard people say that, I think what that does really, it opens up your consciousness to see much more of what's going on than you would normally see. And that's why I think someone can just sit at like the bottom of a tree and just stare at a tree for 5 hours, because they're seeing so much more of what a tree is in a lot of ways. But what that does is it makes you sit at the base of a tree for 6 hours. Like, you're not building roads when you're doing that. You need to limit your focus so that you can act in the world. To your point. I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah, as far as we know what the world is, and that's by definition a limited frame.
Yeah.
On the psychedelics part, yeah, we could talk about that another time when we're not recording.
Right. Okay.
So to get back to the original point of the conversation, I guess. Am I understanding you correctly that, given what you've seen on YouTube conversations and things you've seen on Discord, suggest to you that, that the majority of people who comment have the tendency to clamp things down in a rationalist frame?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's the majority.
Okay, then I've misunderstood.
Yeah, I don't think it's the majority, and that's probably, that's my, I don't know, that's my tendency to come off more strongly than then
What would you like to see more of?
well, here's the thing. Like, I mean, and this is where I have a lot of faith and trust and respect in Paul himself. Like, I think, um, and God willing, Paul's a very um, honorable and humble man, I think, and wise. And so I don't think, like, Paul has never done anything to give me reason to think that he doesn't. I think he handles, I mean, as if he needs my approval, but I think he handles his channel very well. I think the way that he converses with people and what he's trying to do is almost a protective thing in and of itself. Like, I don't know that it's really going to get out of hand. It's just that I don't want, so I guess I could say it this way. It's just like, I don't want Paul's channel to develop a culture at all, really, to any degree. That's kind of like, so say within American Christianity, for example, which I think is closely reflected within American politics, you have like the conservative side and you have the progressive side. Or even on Twitter, you have conservative Christian Twitter and you have progressive Christian Twitter. The kind of dynamics that happen between them for the most time on social media, I would like to see little to none of that on Paul's channel, in the comments, or on Discord. I just don't, it doesn't help anything.
Mm.
And I feel like you get, and I feel what leads to that, like, I don't know if you saw, who was it? Is it, there's a user on Discord, Severin, Severian.
No, I don't think I recall that particular name.
But he had posted, I think it's from Crime and Punishment. He posted like a picture yesterday or something. I'll send it to you, but Julian had shared it with me because I'm not on Discord a ton. And that section of Crime and Punishment almost gets at my concern more than anything, is that I think when people really are convinced of their own rightness and argumentativeness, it leads to tribalism and fighting. And I think that kind of ideological thinking will just always breed more and more division and fighting. And eventually I think I think eventually it will lead to actual war and physical things. And so I want Paul's channel, I guess. I just really love it, and I love the community. And so I don't want it to become divisive. I want us to work through ideas and have opposing ideas, but I don't want it to ever become combative.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. I mean, and I've had similar concerns as we're growing on, what do we accept as acceptable discourse, and part of me hopes I won't have to make decisions on that, but it wouldn't surprise me if it eventually happens.
Well, and this is where temperaments come in. Like, you're such an agreeable guy. I mean, I highly doubt that have you ever had an interaction with someone on anything related to Paul's channel that was, I don't know, that triggered you or made you, where you went away feeling uncared for?
No, but I don't see the point. I mean, that uncared for.
Yeah.
What, on like a call with Paul?
No,
Or on
or on an interaction with anything, like on Discord or in a comment or anything like that.
No, I mean, people disagree. Yeah, it's nice to be agreed with, but I could be wrong. Now, I don't like using I could be wrong too much, because that's some sort of a false humility.
Yeah.
But again, I could be wrong. So
right. But again, that gets at so maybe this can get at what I'm trying to say a little bit. One of my favorite words that, and I don't know where it started from Paul's channel, or that I like, I don't know. I actually think maybe I said it, but it's transactionalism. So even like that, what you just said, when you say I could be wrong, well, of course that's correct, right? But then you said like you can use that almost as like a tool of false humility as a way to manipulate conversation. So you say like I could be wrong. There's a way you can say that authentically and with humility, and there's a way that you're using that as a tool to control the dynamic of a conversation.
It very much depends on what one is responding to. If somebody would say atheists eat babies, I could say I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
Sure.
That's not what I mean. It's more about when we're talking about these concepts of the rational box and or what's it called, the iron box of materialism.
Yeah.
Look, most of the time I'm just trying to understand things. So
yeah,
that puts me in a frame where I don't mind if I'm disagreed with, because I'm still just trying to understand things.
Yeah.
So that's the whole reason I wanted to talk to you, because I liked your video, and I appreciate that you're sharing these kind of voice recordings where you're trying to work things through. So yeah, best we can do is just.
So I want to ask you this before we stop. You maybe have to go, but
sure.
And I don't want it to be. I don't know where we're at. Does this make sense to you? So I would be as equally concerned with so you said the iron box of materialism. To me, that's one rationalistic frame. Scientism or materialism, the kind of Sam Harris, the world is full of objects and facts and information, versus a forum for action in Jordan Peterson's terms. That's one form of rationalism. Christian foundationalist biblicism is another form of rationalism, both equally problematic, in my opinion. Like so like in my mind, this is where I think I have people in my personal life who are self-identify as Christian and religious people, who that wouldn't make sense to them either. Like they see someone like Sam Harris, because I think they think of these things in really simple black and white kind of identitarian terms, where they'd say Sam Harris, atheist, bad. Like he believes reason is and humanism is like the path. But no, I think God and Jesus and the Bible is the path. But I would say ultimately those things are both those are like the curated images that they're putting forth, but really I think behind that and underneath the mask of both those things, when you take it off, they have rationalism and their own monarchical vision of ideas at the top of their hierarchy. That one just puts forth my ideas about the Bible, and the other one puts forth my ideas about material reality. But to me, it's the same thing. It's the same spirit, just different forms, different manifestations.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
makes sense. How? I mean, yeah, people do that. Okay. What is the underlying question, if any? Like
Because
people abstract. Yes, we've established this.
people what?
People abstract.
Yeah.
We've established this. We stereotype. Yes, we have. We want cognitive closure. Okay.
So here's the practical outflow of that. For example, this is the way that I'd illustrate it. So everyone wants Jordan Peterson to make professions of faith and say he believes the resurrection, right? They want, in my mind, so this is my concern with that. This is the way I would hopefully I can say this in a way that makes sense. They're essentially wanting Jordan Peterson to make the outward mask profession of I believe in the resurrection of Jesus, so that they fit into this religious Jesus Bible camp versus the materialist camp. But ultimately, if all of that is still within a logical rationalist frame, it has nothing to do with, like, this is kind of what Kierkegaard, in my understanding, is trying to drive at, is that it ultimately matters how you act and how you live in the world. This is why I love so much what Jordan Peterson says, is that, like, I'm not going to play that game, but I act like I believe in God. The reason I think that's so important, and that he emphasizes that over and over and over, is, to me, is because he's refusing to play that outward mask rationalist Christian game. But my problem is that I think the vast majority of Christians, professing Christians in America, don't realize that difference. They're what they want people to do is just make a confession, sign a card, say a prayer. But to me, that's what's leading to, that's a mechanistic kind of way of knowing, and that's the very thing that then divorces you from the world.
You think that Peterson's way of up close existence is a preferred way of living? God, I can't find the right words.
Well,
I get what you're saying, but I'm not smart enough to build on top of it.
well, I'm not smart enough to say it better in a way that allows it to be understood. It's almost like, I think people will hear this and they'll say, like, well, then, because this is like what I was talking about with Sam, the Unitarian, talking about with Paul, is I'm not, like, with Sam, for instance, I'm much more concerned, I'm much happier. I want Sam to be honest before I want him to say that he's a Trinitarian. His honesty is more important to me than him saying he's Trinitarian. But then people will come back and they'll say that means they'll often come back and just be like, but it's important to be a Trinitarian. And I'm like, cool. I didn't say it wasn't. But it's more important to me first that Sam is honest than that he professes to be a Trinitarian.
Right. You're saying one man's honesty is another man's falsehood, but what matters is it's one man's honesty.
Essentially, I think that's what Kierkegaard is getting at, is that true faith ultimately has to be, is subjective, and that doesn't deny an objective reality, but it's that your faith has to be your faith. It can't just be about a mere profession of what one thinks one ought to believe. That's not what faith is.
I think we're getting somewhere, but It's also 8 p.m. where I am, and and your children are destroying the house from what I can hear.
Well, they were trying to come in, but I don't want them to be on camera.
I'm surprised how much time you have for conversations given you with all these children. It's amazing.
Well, it's just I make time for it, and my wife lovingly understands. She thinks all this is over the top, but she's just like, you're a strange person and you feel compelled to talk to these people, so that's fine.
Yeah, we should start some sort of support group.
Yeah.
Yeah, look. Thank you for entertaining my questions. I appreciate the conversation.
Well, I love talking with you, Job, all the time, and so it's always a pleasure because your earnest pursuit of the truth has always been something that I um, love, and so I always love talking to you. So,
Thank you.
all right,
Have a
buddy.
remaining day, Luke.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be in touch, and I don't know, we can chat on Discord or whatever, but many more conversations, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm fine with this going on Randos, for the record.
Cool. Sounds good. All right, I'll send
All
it
right.
to old Jeff.
Cool.
Okay, see you, buddy. God
Bye, Luke.
bless.